making sure that the stream is active. It does look like it's ready. Oh, it's saying go live. Let's see if this
There does
works. Sorry.
be a lag between in the video a little bit.
Yeah, you can ignore the video and just concentrate on the interview channel. Let's see if this works now. Okay, this should be going live very soon. I've got a notification on my iPad that we are live, and it's just a matter of, are we actually live? Can you trust what these big tech corporations are doing to us? Let's see here. Yes, I see us. All right.
All right.
James Jordan, welcome back again to the Into the Impossible podcast. We are now
And again,
live. You're joining us from Santa Monica. You've been a friend of the show and a friend to me, and thank you so much for joining us. We're here to talk about your book, The Speed of Life, but not that much, because the thing I always hate is when I would be interviewed by a podcaster who didn't read the book and didn't care about the book, but wanted to save his listeners the expense and time of reading the book. So they would say to me, "Tell us what's in your book. Tell us what the reader will learn and what your conclusion is, et cetera, et cetera." I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to say that this book has a subtitle, an illustrated novel, which is quite lovely. I actually bought the Kindle book. I have the hard copies, courtesy of you. But I want to look at some of the illustrations in the book after we do the following thing, which is something that authors are told and readers are told never to do, which is to judge a book by its cover. I want to ask you, how did you come up with the cover illustration and the title of this book?
Brian, is it possible for you to turn the sound on your iPad? I'm getting.
Sorry,
Can you
you're coming through a little bit choppy.
can
Are
you
you
turn
on
down
a?
the? That's better. I was asking if you could turn off the sound on your iPad because there's a delay in the repeat of the sound.
Okay, I'll turn off that here. It should be fine. Do you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. This
Yeah, go for it. I can hear you.
all right. This cover took a long time to develop. Um, there's a character named Andrew who is a very young shaman, Seminole, of mixed race. And in this picture, he's paddling his canoe up the Lockahee River towards uh, toward what I hoped would be a supernova, a connection between the cosmos and the Earth. Um, I had an original illustrator who did anyway, not as good at cover as this one, Eric Savage, my current illustrator. This is his second version of the cover, but every illustration on the cover is inspired by a scene in the. And this particular scene is in section 7, and Andrew has been at Jupiter and is able to see the past through a uh, reflection from the sun of events on Earth that come back through a wormhole, and he wants to get back to Earth to warn people who are be in danger.
And so it is sort of a mind-bending story that goes to the depths of outer space and to the heart of the Everglades, to the criminal justice system, to interracial relations, to some very startling, kind of gripping, almost like a film. It's very theatrical. And this is your first book, right? I mean, this is your first book of fiction
That's
or nonfiction, right?
this is my first book. This is my first novel.
Uh-huh. And when you set out to write it, did you have the story complete or did it develop as you went along?
I had an image of a rape, and the mother is accused of sending the rapist to harm her son, and it developed. Most of the
Sorry, do you hear me? James, can you hear me? Hello, hello. James, do you hear me okay? Hello? James, you're frozen there. Can everybody hear me out there? I have excellent connection, it says, but James is not appearing. Hopefully James will be back on. Let me text him and see if he is available to come back into the stream. You guys hear me. James is coming in and out, it says. Let's see here. Good. Yeah, I'm getting good signal, but something's wrong with his signal. Anyway, we're still going over The Speed of Life, which is James's novel here, and it's an illustrated novel, and it's a rather unique work of literature in that it blends physics and astronomy with a murder mystery, which is quite surprising and some difficult concepts to get into, which I said I don't really want to talk too much about because I don't like to give it away, and some of it, quite frankly, is not suitable for young viewers or young listeners. And I'm hoping James will come back on. Let's see here if I can get the window up here and see if he'll join us back again. Yeah, he is frozen still. This happens not altogether infrequently with this streaming software that I have here. But hopefully it won't be a permanent delay, although I know he is being very generous with his time and with the resources that he's dedicated to this podcast. So he's actually a good friend. I'll take the time just to read some of the encomia, some of the compliments on this book are really, you know, they come from the highest heights of academia, from Kip Thorne to T.C. Boyle, who's a well-known, eminent author. And let's see, I don't see his. He is not on. I should have a backup set up for such events. But we are still live, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to read to you some of the acknowledgments, first of all, which I always like to read. I like to read the cover and I like to read the acknowledgments. I like to read the end of a book because you never know if you're going to make it all the way through. Some event's going to come up, like happened to Kip Thorne, who won the Nobel Prize during the writing of this book. So Kip Thorne was James's science advisor. He read the passages related to astrophysics on several occasions. As he revised and rewrote, he read the entire manuscript when he thought it was complete, provided him with extensive notes and insightful advice. It's pretty amazing. And also, T.C. Boyle read chapters as his writing progressed, provided him with invaluable editorial and structural suggestions. He read the manuscript in its entirety and was complete. And he is, of course, a distinguished professor of English emeritus at the University of Southern California, not the University of California where I am, but that great school to the north in Los Angeles. And then the late Victor Wolfenstein, who's a professor of political science and political theory. Again, these are really amazing contributors to this book. And I think his wide-ranging intellect really shines through here. Still hoping he'll come back on before it's too late. I know that I am coming through, I believe. James is in deep thought. Yes, that's right. So you guys, I assume, can still hear me. There's about 22 people watching right now, and the only one missing is our guest of honor. I hope he'll come back on soon. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the big themes in the book with James, and hopefully he'll be back on. And they involve astrophysics, determinism, time travel, and really far out things like wormholes, like his friend Professor Kip Thorne, who read the book and had much to say about it as well in the science advisory role. It's not too often you get a Nobel Prize winner to be your science advisor on a novel, which is your first book. So I'm very interested to know how that connection was made. So I'm really hoping that he'll come back in. Let's see here. I'm going to take that guy out. All right, so now it's just me. You should all just be seeing me. Now I'm hoping that he will realize that he has to check his darn email. Um, yeah, I'm getting, okay, please log in again. Okay, all right, now he's going to be back, hopefully. Bear with us. And when he comes on, there will be a tinkling sound. You will hear it, and hopefully that will be sufficient. There it is. I hear a tinkling sound. James, are you back?
Yeah, am I back? Do you see me?
I see you. You're back.
Great.
Now you're live. Okay.
All right. All right. Sorry, I don't know cause that, but I'm glad to be back, and I thank you for everything you said, all your kind words. I did see the email. I was just about to log in. All right.
Great. All right, so we are back live, and we are talking about some of the big themes in the book. But first, I can't help but wonder, how did you get connected to Kip Thorne and Leonard Malad?
Well, I knew Leonard through Kip, met him at parties at Kip's house. Um, there's a statement in the Great Design: philosophy is dead, and that science will rule thought going forward. So I took umbrage with that, philosophy major undergrad, and talked to Leonard about it, and was about to give my pitch as to why that couldn't possibly be true. And he said, "Oh, I know. There's ethics, metaphysics, and but Stephen insists upon it. So what could I?" So uh,
And that
that
was
got,
with
I've known Kip for a long time, decade. Kira Lee, his wife, was an undergraduate when I was away. They're very, very good friends of ours.
oh, that's great. And you've been in Los Angeles for a long time, and you also knew T.C. Boyle, right? That's the other encomium on the back. From the courtroom to the swamp primeval to the underpinnings of the universe, James Jordan takes us on a wild ride, a hugely ambitious and thoroughly enjoyable triumph of a first novel. All I can say is bravo. And of course, he is a renowned author in his own right. How did you get to know Professor Boyle?
Uh, I went to grad school in creative US, and so I was fortunate to take his creative, and now
Okay. Uh-huh.
you know,
So,
decades later,
You were talking earlier. Can you hear me okay, James? You're
I hear
still coming in a little choppy. I don't. Are you on an Ethernet connection or a Wi-Fi connection?
internet connection, and I have an external microphone. I'm going
Huh,
to move
it's
it.
very strange. Everyone on the stream is saying I'm sounding okay, but the audio is coming in and out. Yeah, maybe the microphone a little closer, and
I have.
shut off any streams. If you have any videos running, please shut them off,
Uh,
because that will affect your bandwidth. Um, So I want to talk about some of the, as I said, some of the illustrations in this book. It's an illustrated novel, and you've kindly put me in touch with Eric, who did some of the art for this video. Of the artwork that's in here, some of it is cultural, I would say. Some of it is astrophysical. How did you determine kind of the balance between how technical this was going to get? It's not a physics book, and your audience is fiction readers. It's not nonfiction science readers. How did you find the balance between the hero's journey of the story? I really see it as a journey, and maybe it'll continue in future books. But how do you strike the balance between the technical and the sublime?
there was no plan at the outset to create a balance. Um, this book, like Atlas, I was Atlas Shrugged, but that's not it. Uh, Cloud Atlas, it has a similar structure to Cloud Atlas in that each section of the book has chapters that come together at the very end, but don't necessarily flow temporally one to the other. And so I felt illustrations would help the reader understand that she was moving into a whole new realm as she moved from section to section. Each illustration is taken from a scene in one of the chapters in each part of the book, each of the 7 parts. And I conceived of what they should look like. I went through a few illustrators, but Eric by far the best, and we really clicked.
Yeah, there's some of my favorites shown here. And reminder, you can find James at his website, which I have linked underneath his visage. We can also find him on Twitter at James Victor Jord, Jord, not the full name because Twitter won't allow it. And the main thing, I'm an astrophysicist, so I want to talk about some of the astrophysical aspects of the book. I think it is quite fascinating that you blend them together. For me, it's so daunting to think about writing a fiction book. It's almost more daunting than a nonfiction book because a nonfiction book, you can rely on facts and your historical recollection, as I did in losing the Nobel Prize. I actually lived these events, but nobody's lived these events. I mean, at least I hope not. Some of them are pretty graphic, as you know, and I just wonder, kind of advice to people like me who would like to eventually write a work of fiction, have some nascent ideas, but nowhere near the level of concreteness that my nonfiction book had. How do you advise somebody like me who's not an English major by any means, as you probably can tell? How do you advise someone like me to pursue a dream of writing the great American novel, the second
um,
great American novel after this one, of course?
After Gatsby. um, well, first, just to go back, there's an overriding theme in this book, which is the question, what is real? And I don't think you can address what is real just by looking at the surface of the planet Earth. And I think that that's important. Uh, how would I advise you? Well, you're a terrific writer. I have read Losing the Nobel Prize twice, and I've listened to it once. And so I wouldn't worry about the writing. Everybody has a different style when it comes to fiction. Some people want to outline. Some people like T.C. Boyle. Outline would be anathema. Uh,
Mm.
John uh, John Irving would say, if you don't know what the last chapter is about, you're lost. And T.C. Boyle would say the opposite. Um, so would Flannery O'Connor. Um, if you have a story in mind, then you begin with that, and you have to write every day. You have to set aside some time, and like I said, in your case, I wouldn't worry about the prose. It's just very evocative. Your writing is beautiful and evocative, so I would encourage you to write something that's science fiction. From the little science fiction I have read, um, some of it is disappointing. Some of the big winning books are disappointing. Um, Ursula Le Guin's, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It'll come to me in a minute. Um, her science is terrible. She writes science fiction and she makes up things and they happen in outer space, but they could just as well or in other planets. But she doesn't really describe correctly what's going on. She botches Einstein's theories. Um, then you have boy, my mind is losing it at the moment. Uh, who wrote Mars? Andy Weir. Well,
Anywhere, yeah, he's
he's a terrific writer, and one of the uh, virtues of his book is that everything in it could possibly happen, which I
yeah.
admire. But it's not a terribly interesting story. I mean, he gets left there, and then they go back and get him, and they bring him back to Earth. Whereas Ursula Le Guin writes very interesting stories with complex human and political problems in them. This book that just won the Hugo Award, The Three Body Problem,
Hmm.
there, the science in that is just, they don't conform to anything that we understand about the laws of physics. You know, people deflate themselves and all the water goes out of them and then they reinflate themselves. It's an interesting idea, a planet trying to revolve around 3 suns that are orbiting each other. Did you lose me again?
No, I
Um,
see it. Yeah,
but the science is if you care about the science being somewhat true to life, then it'll lose you to that
yeah.
extent. Yeah.
Yeah, we're hoping to have Andy Weir on the podcast in a few months. He is not an alum of UCSD. He went to UCSD, like Kim Stanley Robinson, like David Brin, like the Benford brothers. Vast numbers of amazing science fiction writers call UCSD their alma mater, but not him. He didn't graduate, so maybe that's why the gaps there are that you found. But he has another book coming out called Project Hail Mary, and I'm scheduled to hopefully talk to him in May. I'll let you know when that comes out. Reminder, we're
Yeah,
talking to James Victor Jordan today. Please follow him on Twitter. Please go to his website. His website is really magnificent. I don't know who does the website, Jim, but it's such a fun website to play around with. I get lost in it when I do it, as I do with your writing. Please follow him. You'll find some video trailers for the book, which are filled with the illustrations, which are incredible works of art. Not just it's not just a work of literature; it's a work of art as well. And you'll find these blurbs, these encomia from Kip Thorne, from T.C. Boyle, from some of the most renowned authors in history. And you can also check out and leave a review of it on Amazon, Goodreads, and elsewhere. And you'll find that it has just almost uncountable numbers, constellations of 5-star reviews. So congratulations on this. I want to know, you mentioned a little bit of your prescription for working on a book, daily habits, writing every day. I wonder, if you found the process addictive, or if you want to branch out. I know you have tentative plans. I don't know if you want to talk about it for a follow up involving perhaps some of the characters. Again, I don't like to get into too much detail because it's much easier to give away, kind of the spoil the book for people, and I want them to have the savoring experience of it. But can you talk about future plans and whether or not you find the process addictive?
when I'm in it, it's addictive. I have to do it all the time because I have ADD. If I'm into something 100%, and if I get out of it, I spend some days doing other things, and then it's sort of like going to the gym or something like that. I can easily be distracted and have to get back into it. So I think every successful writer that you will talk to, either in terms of their being a bestseller or their being having a lot of literary awards, will tell you it's just something you have to do every day.
Hmm.
Um, I would imagine losing the Nobel Prize. You thought about it every day, but you probably wrote a little bit. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I
And
tried to. Yeah, it was hard because we were dealing, I mean, hard in a good way. We had little kids running around, and there's still some little kids running around, which is always fun. But yeah,
uh,
carving out the time, making it a part of your profession, even though it isn't my profession necessarily. My job is to build astronomical telescopes and take them to the world's extremes. But for me, the kind of writing and even the podcast has become a chance. As I think I said to you months ago, we had to delay it a couple times because of COVID and my schedule. And I said, what I like about the podcast is that, in contradistinction to my day job, where I might have to talk to somebody as I do in 16 minutes from now, I have to talk to some contractor about building a roadway at 17,000 feet in the Atacama Desert of Chile. That's someone I have to talk to. But when I get to chat with you, it's someone I want to talk to, and the other people that I've gotten to know. And you start to change your identity when you become a writer, when you produce something. And so I encourage everybody necessarily to write a book. I don't think everyone should publish a book. I think you should only write a book when it can't not be written, in a sense. And I feel like the themes in this book I want to explore next, because they're not. It's very difficult to define it. And in fact, I was worried at first, can I understand this book? Not because of intelligence, but because it's such a broad, sweeping scope of the book, ranging from, as they say, murder mystery to violent crime to the criminal justice system to like Native Americans to just incredible breadth, and then throwing astrophysics on top of it. But because it has this core of a true crime story or whatever, fictional crime story, I want to talk about that. As you know, I've talked a lot about free will, determinism, reality, consciousness on this podcast. I want to ask you, where do you think that this comes into play in the criminal justice system? Are you a believer in determinism? Are you a believer in free will? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
well, I'm a believer in free will. I know Stephen Hawking said free will is an illusion. If you're not I'm a lawyer, if you're not a believer in free will, then how do you ethically punish a criminal? Because the crime was, they had no choice. It was going to be, and probably most people believe there's some mixture in between. Um, you don't really have, existentialists will say everybody has freedom, even if you're in a prison cell or in a concentration camp or a prisoner of war camp. You've got the freedom of your thoughts, and I think that is not true. Harsh. If you have hunger, if you have pain, you don't have the type of freedom that we usually believe. So there, anatomically, maybe we're determined. We'll be hungry if we don't eat. Consciously, we can think of anything we want. We have free will. Although, again, if you're hungry, you're not going to be thinking about much more than getting that next meal, uh, killing the beast, bringing it home for the family to feed them. It's a mixture. I do address free will and determinism extensively in the book.
Right. And so, I wonder as I'm reading it, because you portray it in a balanced way, how what you really believe. And so it's good to have that. The characters, and the explication of it are different, of course, but um I've had, in fact, with your friend who you introduced me to, Leonard Mlodinow, who was Stephen Hawking's, perhaps most prolific collaborator, and in fact
Mm.
wrote some of the final books that Stephen ever wrote, including the Grand Design.
He wrote
He had
too.
say
He wrote the
what's that?
first ones too. He wrote the first ones too. A Brief History of Time, but he didn't get co-author credit. But he was in on
Really?
every one. Yes,
I didn't
really.
know. I didn't know that Leonard wrote the first, A Brief History of Time.
Well,
I thought he wrote the second one, A Briefer History of Time. I'll have to ask him about that.
yeah, ask him. He didn't write it. He co-wrote it, and apparently all the way to the end, as I gave the anecdote earlier, Stephen had the final say on
Yeah.
everything.
And Stephen, of course, didn't necessarily believe in it, but as Roger Penrose, who's been a four-time guest on my show, has said about Stephen, it didn't matter what you thought, you always could find Stephen agreeing with you because he changed his mind so often. And the former you quote, and you got extensive help from the previous Richard Feynman professor of physics at Caltech, namely Kip Thorne. I spoke recently to the current holder of that chair, who is none other than John Preskill, who's an amazing intellect. And we talked a lot about the bets that he had with Stephen. I remember when they made these bets, and then
And Kip,
Stephen would capitulate and so forth. But Leonard and I had a very interesting and really quite uh, maybe agitated. It might not be the right word, but we had a very intense conversation with Frank Wilczek, which you can find, and Deepak Chopra. So it's Deepak Chopra, me, Frank Wilczek, and Leonard Mlodinow in conversation, and they were going at it, Frank and Leonard. I found it very interesting because Leonard is a essentially, as I can understand it, a proponent of super determinism, that everything is determined in the wave function of the Big Bang, and if we just can't understand it, but if we could. And then on the other side, Deepak is saying, well, there's quantum, magic that, and so we were all kind of like just criticizing Deepak, who's a good friend, by the way. But don't get too woo woo on us. But this notion of like, determinism being everything. The one thing I will get from Leonard, and that comes through in your book as well, is that yeah, there is. How can you blame somebody? How can you have a justice system? And it was actually Wilczek, the Nobel laureate, the quantum chromodynamics explicator. He was saying that no, because then how could you punish people if everything is determined? And it was Leonard Mlodinow, your friend of mine, saying no, it's everything's determined. I find it kind of surprising. I would have thought the other way around. But in terms of determinism, nowadays we hear all sorts of things related to consciousness, and there's touched upon in the book as well. How awareness and blame and so forth. There's this whole notion now of kind of super consciousness or panpsychism. What do you make of that? That everything is conscious and everything has at its root layer of reality a perception that's unique to the object itself. Where do you fall in that spectrum?
personally, that's not my perspective at all. In the book, there are characters who believe that everything is alive, stones, trees, and
Yes.
that would be Deepak's belief also, and I know that from having read War of the World Views.
Hmm.
Uh, Henry James said the author should not have a point of view that comes across in the book, but the characters should, even if even if the author is even if there's a first person narrator. And so I tried to do that in this book. So, do I believe in shamanism? That there's a non-ordinary reality where shamans can travel with their power animals. Well, personally, I think I'm too much of an empiricist, but
So, mhm.
there is evidence, there is inferential evidence that they do this because over centuries, shamans practiced virtually the same type of medicine, uh, and they were separated by continents and geographical distances that were so far they could not have possibly have communicated. And some went into this state using drugs, like in Peru, and some did it doing chants and rattles. They got into this state. Um, the characters in my book don't use drugs to go into a state of non-ordinary reality. But how do you explain the fact that they were doing similar things and having similar beliefs and describing similar things over the centuries? So it's an inference. Um, but I guess I'm too much of an empiricist. But in the book, I have characters who believe that and they endeavor to express it.
Yeah, and I'm always wondering, is this the author, as you say, because a good author won't reveal if it's his or her perspective. Along those lines, I felt you got into very fraught territory that could have been very risky. You're a presumably Caucasian male who's in a heterosexual relationship. That you thank your wife, you acknowledge your wife's loving, tenderness and help. And you're a lawyer who's lived for a long time, as I gather, in Santa Monica, California. And here you are writing, a book that takes place a large part from the perspective of a mixed race Native American, maybe and kind of consultation with the criminal justice system. He encounters African. How did and there's scenes written from female perspectives, obviously. How, like, what gave you the chutzpah, the the courage to do that, and especially in a first work, because I would be kind of scared to broach some of those aspects of this novel.
There are writers who claim that if you're not Native American, you have no right to write
Hmm.
from the American point of view. Louise Erdrich, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, uh, T.C. Boyle, however, uh, writes his book World's End has
Mm.
a Native American who's a main character. If you're a writer, you should be able to write from a woman's point of view. And T.C.
Yeah.
Boyle's written a number of books from women's perspectives. You're an artist,
Yeah.
and an artist, you should be able to inhabit different thought patterns, different feelings, different bodies, even. And so I had people criticize me and say, "Well, you'll never get a following. Nobody will ever read this book because you're not Seminole, half black and half shaman and half white."
Right.
I grew up in Florida. The people needed, I felt, an oppressed people, a people to whom the criminal justice system had been unfair, and that's my characters just grew that way.
Hmm. Yeah, and the metaphor of the Everglades and kind of the primeval, and the canoes as time transporters and places that go through time and space. I found it very gripping, and I'm not alone. And I do want to, maybe close this section before we get to, as you know, I'm very pressed for time. I always thought, James, that astronomers would spend our times on telescopes, but actually, we're much more often on telecons than telescopes, unfortunately. So I do have a couple of questions that we'll get to that I ask all my guests who honor me by coming on the show. But before we get there, I really do want to, kind of close with one big picture question that kind of grew out of it. And a conversation I had with Lawrence Tribe, who's an attorney, constitutional law professor at Harvard, was Barack Obama's law professor. And as you know, I've been thinking a lot about artificial intelligence and how we can have applications and implications for physics. I'm in the process now of turning Galileo's written words into audio form with Carlo Rovelli and others, including Jim Gates and many other eminent physicists. Frank Wilczek has agreed to play a part in it. And my next step after that is to take the words and the audio and put it into an AI that I'm calling Galileo. and kind of converse with him. And I started to think about this with regard to Lawrence Tribe and the Constitution. And you, as an attorney, I want to ask: are there implications for artificial intelligence in the criminal justice system, which is featured very prominently in the Speed of Life? Could we get to an artificial, Supreme Court? Could we get into a situation where we have advanced capabilities from a general artificial intelligence that allow us to make perfect decisions in terms of criminal justice?
In terms of decisions of uh, consciousness, is something right or wrong? Uh, I hope not, even given the current constitution of the philosophies on the court. Certainly, a lot of things can be done automatedly with artificial intelligence, if you will. Jurors can be screened and ruled out on on a perfectly objective basis. Uh, so it could be streamlined. A lot of the court system is going electronic now, but in terms of, uh, I hope not. And maybe that's just my fear. Maybe I'm wrong
Yeah.
about that.
So I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I do see Eric is in the audience, Eric Savage, who's the illustrator. I do love the shoe illustration. That was one of my favorite ones. Eric is commenting on here. So other people are talking about the ability to make split-second judgments may not be good in criminal justice. In other words, the jury process, which again features prominently here, is a deliberative one, and it can take weeks or months even to reach consensus. So if we had an instantaneous general artificial intelligence, maybe we'd lose some of that in the criminal justice system. So I want to take any questions from the audience, but while I'm teeing up, so folks, you can type your questions in the chat box. I am monitoring that as we are chatting live. And as I say, James, I always ask my guests the following questions, some of which will touch upon some of the characters we've already mentioned. The first question I ask relates to the Nobel Prize. As you know, the Nobel Prize comprised a material will. As an attorney, you'll appreciate that I pursued this as an executor or somebody suing an estate or something like that, because I don't feel the Nobel Prize has lived up to its legal obligations, let alone its moral obligations. But part of the Nobel Prize was
Certainly
to
not.
say that one more time.
It hasn't lived up to what Alfred Nobel intended in physics.
That's right. Yes,
And
and it's Yeah, and so, but the aspect that's germane to my question right now is whether or not you did what Alfred did, which is to construct an ethical will. So not a monetary will, not a trust and estates plan, but an ethical will, which in Hebrew we call a zava'ah, which is basically a wisdom will. And I want to ask you, as Alfred said, he wanted to endow the prizes that most benefited humankind. That was his ethical component. The material component was the money he left. And the practical component, which is mostly ignored, is how many people could win it, how often they have to be nominated, etc. But I want to ask you, James, when you reach the biblical age of 120 years old, how how do you want to leave the world in terms of wisdom, or what do you want to leave the world in terms of the wisdom that you've accrued throughout your time on Earth?
well, for this book, I would say that is not to make snap.
Uh-huh. So something happened. I just got cut out, but hopefully it'll come back up. Switching channels. Let's see if this comes back up. So yes, we got that. And I think this is still live. Let's see here. It may not be, but hopefully this is good here. Sorry about that. We might have a rare two-part episode, which which has never happened before, and you could probably guess why, because it is a challenge to get all the technology to work here. Let's see. Hopefully this is working and recording. I see it still showing live, so that
I,
is a positive sign. You still see me and you still see it live?
no, I don't see you, but I see me and
Okay,
more of me.
yeah, I wanted to have you focus on you so
Right.
that we could so that you could answer the questions directly to the camera. Let's see here. I am now going to check 32. It still says it's live. Anyway, so let's keep going. The next question I have is relates to what I call the monolith. And you might know from Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey that these aliens leave these monoliths throughout the solar system for human beings to find. And one of the things they find are these monoliths in the plains of Africa, and they don't know what to do with it. So they start freaking out and hitting with a bone and whatnot. But I want to ask you, if you had access to a million or billion year lasting time capsule, like these monoliths might be, what piece of knowledge would you put in it? And to inspire you, I'll quote from Richard Feynman. Feynman said, if in some cataclysm all of scientific knowledge were to be destroyed, and only one sentence passed on to the next generation of creatures, what statement would convey the most information about what we know? And he said, it's everything is made of atoms. What would you put in that really demonstrates what we've learned as human beings, or comprises the knowledge that humanity has accrued during our 4 billion years of evolution?
Don't judge others by differences, especially superficial differences between them and yourselves.
Mm.
Religion, skin color, that would be hard for me.
Right. Yeah, that is a great piece of wisdom to convey. And the last piece of wisdom conveyed today will go back in time. Now I'm going to ask you advice to your former self before I have to break off in time and attend to another telecon, which you can tell how much I look forward to these telecons. But it's the price you pay to be a scientist these days. Anyway, Arthur C. Clarke, who is the namesake of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination here at UC San Diego, he said the only way of discovering the limits of what's possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. That's the name of the podcast. So I want to ask you, what aspect of life, now that you've lived it at the speed of life, what aspect of life perplexed you and mystified you as a 20-year-old that now makes sense to you because you had the courage and dignity to go into the impossible?
Women at 20.
You're not the first person who said that. This week, in fact, I had another person say that exact same thing. I was on his podcast and I asked him that, and he said, he said I would go back in time and tell me to ask out more women. And I said, if I did that, I'd just get more rejections than I already had. But yes, all right. Well, I have to thank you so much, James. This has been a treat. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry we had such technical difficulties, but it's really a treat, and I do appreciate the hand inscription. I bought the book on Amazon just so I could leave a verified review of this wonderful book, which means so much to me that you came on the show. We didn't get to talk about everything. I'm excited to hear about a future upcoming book. Do you want to say anything about that?
Oh, I'm very honored to have been on your show. I'm looking forward to your next book because losing the Nobel Prize was really, it just grabbed me. And I love the way you were part of it. You're intertwined personally throughout it and the scientific mystery. So I hope you're going to be writing another book. I'm writing a book right now about twins, a brother and a sister who are close but have a falling out over the disposition of their father's estate.
Wow.
As you can tell,
Well,
I'm staying away.
say that again.
I said, as you can tell, I'm staying away from the law.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it might not be such a bad idea. Edwin Hubble said his father wanted him to be a lawyer, and he actually went to Oxford and he studied laws or whatever they call it over there. And then he quit and he came back and he told his father, "I'd rather be a second-rate astronomer than a first-rate lawyer." And so maybe you're doing the same thing. Maybe you're being a first-rate writer and a first-rate lawyer, or maybe some other combination thereof. But James Victor Jordan, jamesjordan.com, please, everybody, go out, get this book. It's a phenomenal work of literature and art. Thanks to Eric. Hi, Eric. Hope you're still watching. Really appreciate your contributions to both the book, obviously, and the podcast. Are you going to work with Eric on the sort of semi-sequel follow-up to Speed of Light?
I will work with Eric as long as he'll have me. I'm probably not to work with. I actually have a scene from the new book that I've for over a year I've been meaning to send to Eric and ask him what he thinks about an illustration for it.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah, I mean Eric is multi-talented. It's not only in drawing illustrations, but he designed and maintains my web. He can do videos, movies. He's awesome.
He
And
really is.
you can find links to him on my website.
I was just going to say that. Eric Savage is the man we're talking about, a legend in this world. James, thank you so much for going into the impossible. Have a wonderful weekend. And yes, I'm going to take you up on that. I'm going to need some advice for my novel, losing the Pulitzer Prize. I think that's my next one.
All right, I will. That's funny. I'll send you some books.
Great. Thank you so much, James. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, guys.